I think human factors plays a critical role in the safety and well-being of our society.
Welcome to HFIG Talks, a podcast produced by the Human Factors Interest Group at the University of Toronto. My name is Dina and I'm HFIG's treasurer. And in this episode, we wanted to talk about advocating for the importance of human factors as a discipline in industry, academic institutions, and among the general public. So I, along with Professor Mark Chignall, HFIG's faculty supervisor, had a conversation with Dr. Carolyn Caillot, a professor in the Department of Computer Science at IMT Atlantique in France, and a professor of Biomedical, Industrial, and Human Factors Engineering at Wright State University, and Dr. Barrett Caldwell, a professor of Industrial Engineering at Purdue University. We talked about the role of human factors in the design process and the product lifecycle, how we can educate engineering students and industry professionals about the importance of human factors, and how we should raise awareness among the public about the value of human factors in their everyday lives. So here's our conversation with Dr. Caillot and Dr. Caldwell.
I'd like to start off with the experience that every human factors professor, I think, since finding out how to measure the snake in the Garden of Eden, that has had, which is you're in the middle of a class and you say something about, profound about human factors, and a student's hands go up and they say, isn't that just common sense? And then you, of course, reply very quickly with your witty riposte, which is, common sense isn't so common, right? And the trouble is that the students walk away and they're not convinced, right? And their attitude still is, I'd rather learn something which gives me expertise and does not teach me how to use my common sense. So there we have it, I think, in a nutshell. How do we promote human factors when most aspiring young engineers, and even people in the profession, think of it as a second-grade common sense type of, social work for engineers?
Yeah, that's basically the premise of our podcast today, and we're happy to have you both to talk about this issue that I personally care a lot about. I thought we could first start with a round of introductions and then move on to the questions.
Okay, I guess I will start. My name is Carolyn Caillot. I am a professor in the Department of Computer Science at IMT Atlantique in Brest, France, as well as a professor in the Department of Biomedical, Industrial, and Human Factors Engineering at Wright State University in Dayton in the US. I have joint appointments in the Department of Mechanical and Materials Engineering and Trauma and Surgery in the Boonshoff School of Medicine. So for over 25 years, I have conducted research in the medical domain, designing and developing enabling technology to enhance healthcare delivery and patient safety. Specifically, I study the human factors issues that surgeons face during minimally invasive surgery and robotic surgery. And I try to address these problems by designing solutions such as virtual reality simulators for surgical skills training, sensory augmentation for haptic perception, navigational aid displays, as well as team communication and coordination. I also have a medical device startup company that develops and markets fluoro-free surgical tools for endovascular surgery. Now, recently, I have pivoted and I'm focusing my research efforts in solving problems related to industry of the future, also known as Industry 4.0. Industry 4.0 is characterized by smart factories, smart automation, connectivity, flexible and adaptive manufacturing processes, as well as sustainable manufacturing practices. As small and large companies prepare themselves for Industry 4.0, they're beginning to grapple with many of the problems that we have seen in medicine and previously in other critical systems, such as human-robot interaction, decision-making, team communication, et cetera, et cetera. There are parallels between medicine and manufacturing when we consider the systems as complex social technical systems where people and machines work in distributed locations with incomplete information, but loads and loads of data.
I don't know
there.
about you, Carolyn, but that doesn't sound like common sense stuff to me. That sounds kind of complicated.
Well, so when we talk about human factors in the classroom, we start with an introductory course mainly talking about human errors, right? And you and I have the same experience because I think this is how we try to relate to this discipline that we call human factors. And so talking about errors and how humans make errors and the implications of these errors, both for human well-being and system safety, etc. I think it's the easiest way for us to communicate and start this conversation with our students. And so a lot of times our examples boil down to common sense. But really, when you start looking more deeply into it, human factors is not common sense. And so, what you said earlier at the beginning of this podcast, I think is just scratching the surface. And I really hope that students stick around long enough to understand and realize that no, it's not common sense.
Great.
I'm Barrett Caldwell. I am a professor of industrial engineering at Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana, in the U.S. I also had a courtesy appointment in the department, we called them schools, of aeronautics and astronautics. And that actually harkens back to my background in history. I've been working as a professor for 30 years now. And my description of my own career is I'm a systems engineer for whom humans in individual cognitive performance and team performance are my systems of focus. So originally I was trained as an aerospace engineer looking at space systems. And through the beginning of my career, I started to realize that there were lots of engineers looking at all of the aspects of spaceflight human exploration, but not actually studying the humans. And to me, that is sort of like studying aircraft and designing airplanes without understanding aluminum very well. And so I thought, no, this is not a really good idea for me. And so my research career has been focusing on how individuals and teams get, share, and use information well. That started in the area of human spaceflight, including space station design or team communication for mission control, and has also been applied to areas like not just the surgical sorts of teams that Dr. Kara was explaining, but cross-functional teams, including handoffs in traumatic brain injury or radiotherapy, or any of those challenges. The joke is, of course, I'm trained as a rocket scientist. Now, when I'm not doing rocket science, I may actually be doing brain surgery. So none of that is common sense. None of that is trivial. And most importantly, the costs of doing it wrong are extremely high. So it is absolutely essential that we do the best job that we know how to do with the information and the resources that we have available, given that you're never going to have exactly the world you want. And you're never going to have a situation that exactly meets all of your expectations or all of your requirements. So given all of that, how do you do a good, robust job of designing and operating systems in these very complex environments? If that's common sense, I will also remind people that instinct theory was also common sense at one point, not much more than a century ago.
I love that, Barrett. So I've been doing surgery for 25 years. I'm now starting to build airplanes.
So we seem to be dancing in our career emphasis, yes.
Mm.
And I think that goes to show how important it is to have this kind of human factors background and include that in a lot of different domains. And I guess in both of your introductions, you sort of touched a bit on this, but my question was, why do you think it's important to advocate for human factors practices and involvement? And what do you think are the implications of leaving out human factors experts in the design of critical systems and also everyday things?
Wow, this is the crux of the issue, isn't it? I think human factors plays a critical role in the safety and well-being of our society. So if we don't advocate for it, for its implementation in everything that we do, then we risk lives, we risk health, we risk comfort, productivity, happiness, well-being, etc. I believe our health and well-being are too precious to wait for nature to take its course, which could mean that we don't benefit from human factors until it's too late. We will probably, hopefully we'll be talking about, where human factors comes in, where we should be applying it, how we should be applying it, maybe, but the importance of human factors. And at the end of the day, I think human factors is important because it impacts our well-being and safety, and not just safety for individuals, but safety for society in general.
I would echo that, but I also want to extend it a little bit. Obviously, human factors to me is important. Well, okay, it's not important for systems that humans don't have any influence or response or receipt of that system. So if you've got a system that there were never any humans anywhere involved at any point, then you don't need human factors. I don't think there are that many of those systems out there.
There aren't any.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you're saying that humans are important users, consumers, designers, implementers, managers of those systems, if the humans are the systems themselves that you care about, then you actually ought to need to know something about human factors. The extension, or maybe even the pushback, and this says something to my age more than anything else, is I remember when we used to talk about life cycle analysis and design for X, where whatever your criteria was the X. And one of the important issues about those two principles was that you weren't done when you were done with the design. Any operational system has to be able to be analyzed in terms of the system as currently performing, not just the system as designed. So when I had the opportunity to look at some of the original design criteria for the United States Space Station Freedom, which is not the space station that we have, had a different crew size, a different operational parameter. It was only going to be built by one country and operated by one country. This is not the current environment. And if you look at the way that any international space station operates now, it is clearly not what our designs looked like in the 1970s or 80s. So to say that the human factors expertise ends with the design process, I think is also shortchanging what human factors can contribute. And I think it's a misunderstanding of what operational life cycles of engineered systems look like.
I completely agree. I feel like human factors should be involved, or someone with a background in human factors should be involved in every step of the process, not just in the design, but also like later on in the operation. Unfortunately, we're, at least to my knowledge, I believe we're in a state where a human factors expert might just be called in sort of after a disaster happens or something goes wrong. Do you think I'm correct in my assessment? Or in your opinion, just in general, what do you think the current state of human factors is in terms of just people's general awareness of it as a field and its inclusion in design processes?
Well, I would say that yes, often human factors people are called in after an accident has happened. That's not necessarily okay. Accidents are tragic. Loss of life is lamentable. But it actually demonstrates this is what happens when you don't pay attention. Right? And as I say to my students who ask, well, what's the exact right answer? There are lots of bridges in the world with lots of different designs. They're made of different materials. They look different. You can recognize which city you're in by the bridge that is shown. Bridges that fall down are wrong answers, and we learn from that. Having said that, is this where I confess that I wasn't trained as a human factors engineer? I have no degrees from an institution that grants degrees in industrial engineering. I did not know about the Human Factors Society, as it was called at the time, until after I accepted my first faculty offer. So it's not that you have to grow up with this training, but you need to learn how to apply it.
You know, as with many disciplines, people do not start with being trained in that discipline. So, you know, I take biomedical engineering as an example because that is also a relatively new field. Many of the biomedical engineering professors that do not have a degree in biomedical engineering, right? A lot of the schools or departments of biomedical engineering are very recent. Likewise, with human factors engineering, I think if you look around, especially people of our generation, you don't find too many of them or us having a degree, a proper degree in human factors engineering because it didn't exist as we were going through school. But that is not to say that it is not a legitimate and flourishing discipline right now. And so what Dinah said earlier about, you know, do you think that this situation of having human factors experts being called in only after an accident had occurred or a disaster has occurred? I think that was true many years ago, maybe not too many years ago, but that was true then. I don't think it is still true now because I see more and more people talking about human factors in various different domains, not just in medicine where I have spent most of my professional life. Compared to 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, especially now in the manufacturing sector, I see a lot of people talking about human factors and ergonomics. Now, in North America, I think people tend to focus on design, on the place, on placing human factors in the design phase as the most important because that affects the rest of your product development and implementation and usage, etc. And I agree with that totally. So, you know, whether we're talking about products or systems, I think human factors should be involved at the design stage. And you know, maybe even earlier, actually, definitely even earlier because we have the requirements analysis before the design phase. You know, this is what we teach in product design in our classes. Now that I am in Europe, I see human factors everywhere, not just not just in medicine, but also in manufacturing and other aspects of society. In Europe, however, human factors has a more specific meaning. They're usually associated with user well-being, and more specifically in the manufacturing setting with worker well-being. So, physical fatigue, biomechanics, repetitive injury, job rotation, work design, etc. Certainly, this is due to the fact that manufacturing is still a large part of the economy in many European countries and not so much in North America. So awareness is certainly much higher now about human factors. Implementation during the design process, and I guess I can speak to the medical industry here, is also much greater. It helps that the regulatory bodies are now insisting on inclusion of human factors when they examine products, design controls, and error mitigation plans, etc. Medical device companies now hire human factors consultants, or they have their own HF divisions, especially to handle the regulatory activities. And also larger companies actually have their own human factors teams work on requirements analysis. They participate in design and product evaluation, etc. And in fact, you only have to look at the large number of consultancies, human factors consultancies that are popping up everywhere now to know that human factors has become mainstream. If you go to the Human Factors International Symposium on Healthcare, you'll see that there are human factors consultancies that are hiring like mad, and they are profitable. That, I think, speaks to the fact that human factors is now more mainstream than maybe even 5 years ago.
I think I can see that too. Actually, 5 years ago, I don't believe I was aware of human factors either. I did not have that background. I had a background in electrical and computer engineering. I worked for a while, and then when I went back to grad school in supposedly engineering management, which was under a department of industrial engineering in my home country, I just got acquainted with human factors by chance, and I found it really interesting, and I just decided to get into it. So I'm from Lebanon, by the way, so it wasn't necessarily like a very common field over there or well-known field. And right now I do see some more people learning about it and getting into it at an undergraduate or graduate level. And I do think, though, that, as you mentioned, Carolyn, in Europe, I think that it's also becoming a bit more common. I always thought of it as a traditionally more North American discipline, but that's just my perspective, I believe. I feel like more traditional human factors it's called human factors more in North America, but in other countries it might be called something else, like ergonomics or something like wellness or biomechanics, or it's kind of integrated into other fields, I guess that's how I see it.
Actually, if I could respond to that, because I would say that you're talking about several very, very important things. Human factors, even in North America, has this sort of history within the engineering disciplines as well as within the psychology disciplines. And so that's one of the distinctions. Another distinction is that in Europe, that emphasis on ergonomics, both from a material worker safety standpoint, also has an element of quality of working life. And I remember earlier on in my career, a lot of the work that I was doing in team coordination actually had better response in Northern Europe and Scandinavia, because they could understand quality circles and they could understand team information sharing in ways that individual operator interfaces in North America, that was still the emphasis at the time. I'm also excited because actually one of my former PhD students is also from Lebanon. And I remember when he first interviewed me for graduate school, and he was used to thinking in a primarily French educational model of here's how you do the math, here's how you do the application, here's how you do the development of the rigorous structural things. And what was this soft, fuzzy human factors stuff? Shouldn't he really go into operations research? And when I explained, well, here's what we do and here's why, he had a very significant change of heart. As it turns out, most of his career has been in applying human factors, engineering principles to medical systems. So and he's been doing that in the US and in Lebanon. The really important consideration there is not being limited to the original way that you were presented that information. And, the same way that I think, Caroline, you said that you have an appointment in breast in computer science. And Dinah, you also said electrical and computer engineering. Well, clearly the first computer science faculty didn't have degrees in computer science, right? It's not logically possible, but it is an evolving discipline that has different applications, different considerations if you are more aware of Ada Lovelace's contributions to Jacquard looms than if you are thinking about calculation based on tabulating manufacturing defects. Those both have contributions to what we think of as the field now, but they're clearly from different roots. And
yeah, sometimes it's a matter of labeling, right? So what we call human factors, I think, evolved. And what Europeans call human factors is more leaning towards ergonomics. And as we discover and people become more aware of human factors, I think the meaning may even evolve yet again. I remember starting in the beginning of my career, and remember I've been at this 25 years. I think my cohort and we were a little bit hesitant in using human factors to label ourselves. And I remember grant proposals where human factors did not appear anywhere. And because if we did put down human factors, we would not get funded. Or when we introduce ourselves, we would not say human factors engineers. We would say systems engineers or industrial engineers and mechanical engineers. I mean, things have changed. So we really need to be able to define, describe, and educate about what human factors is. And, even if it changes over time, that's okay, as long as we're able to show its value. We're able to have an impact on health and safety and well-being of the society.
Yeah, and it's ironic that you put it that way, because I remember as an undergraduate being told that, oh, I guess you're probably one of those systems engineers, because my faculty, based on when they were trained and when they were educating me, a systems engineer was someone who was not very good at any of the individual specialties, but not so poor that you got to fail them out. And yet now everything is systems. Oh my goodness, we've got to have systems. We've got to have, I don't want to call it just fad and fashion, but there are clearly cycles of popularity and recognition. And, 40 years ago, if you were looking at aircraft design, everything you couldn't talk about without having some human factors, either at the glass cockpit level or the cockpit resource management level. I would even say that it's been a measure of success that that's not really an emphasis as much anymore, because people said, don't even talk to me if you don't have that piece, as opposed to what you're talking about from earlier. Oh, don't talk to me if you want to talk about that piece.
I think it's good that, people are recognizing the importance of it, but do you still think that we do need to do some more to increase the visibility of it as a field? And how can we do that? Do you think there are still barriers to it?
I think there are significant barriers of our own creation and sustenance. I think, Mark, you were asking me about whether or not I still had those vessels filled, and I think this might be the time. There are not enough people with the skill sets in human factors engineering, because I think if there were more, you would have more systems that would at least recognize that as an important objective function or design criteria. But I think that the profession does itself no favors in the way it excludes or restricts what it thinks of as who should be in human factors and who gets to control what that means.
Interesting take. I don't know whether I agree with you or disagree with you, because I wanted to go back to also what Mark said earlier. By characterizing human factors as common sense. And then in one sense, I agree with you. By characterizing human factors as common sense, we devalue human factors, and we suggest that anyone can do it. And in fact, at the same time, we also suggest that everyone should do it. But if everyone can do it and everyone should do it, how do we ensure that it is done well? And how do we avoid having it done poorly, which in turn breaks down the value and our reputation? So I think this needs to be parsed out more deeply, and I'm not sure I understood your original statement to be able to figure out that second part. But to answer Dinah's question, even though I said that human factors has become mainstream, so human factors has arrived, so to speak, right? Especially in the medical domain and also in process control and aviation, etc. It doesn't mean that human factors as a field is visible or has visibility across the board. I think, as with everything or anything, we need to engage in multiple concurrent efforts to increase the visibility of HF, of human factors. So for one, feeding the pipeline of production of human factors engineers, by increasing the number of students in our human factors programs in school, will increase the number of trained professionals who practice human factors in society, right? And do it well and do it correctly.
And I think, Caroline, that is one of the problems of our own creation, because many academics don't emphasize the training of undergraduate and master's level engineers as a primary emphasis of their educational process. The papers are written for academics. The papers are written for PhD level science. That is not the same emphasis as having undergraduate students in their one exposure to human factors understand what they can take from that course into their bachelor's level job.
No, I would disagree. And Barrett, you know better, because you spent your sabbatical at Tufts University, where I was director of the Human Factors Program. The Human Factors Program at Tufts University is an undergraduate degree program and a master's level degree program for human factors. So
And
it's
Tufts
not just PhD.
Right, but Tufts is very much an anomaly. Definitely in New England, it's an anomaly. And one of the things that we clearly saw, and I have heard this since my time at Tufts, of academics angry at industry for hiring the students away from the academic programs, and that's so wrong and so bad. Okay,
well,
that to me is clearly a misunderstanding of what one's best effect can be.
Yeah, right. I wish that were happening everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Human factors students are being snatched up by industry because they're so valued, they're so highly skilled and effective. We should all be so happy as academics, as professors.
And you know, your point about the human factors consultancies, I would ask the question, how many of those human factors consultancies would continue to exist if more academics were more able and willing to work in partnership with industrial questions on industrial timescales? That if I had the choice of working with this well-known university and get a series of answers over the next 6 to 12 to 18 months versus this small startup consultancy, which would I go with?
Okay, this is a problem with the system as a whole. You know, professors are awarded or rewarded for publications, for peer-reviewed journal articles, not for solving real-life problems that industry needs solved. And so there's a mismatch. Now, things are changing. A lot of universities are now understanding the value of collaboration with industry. And I think even some granting agencies are now realizing that there is a need to transfer some of the work that we do in the laboratory to the marketplace, to the use case scenario, to the field. And so, you know, even NSF has programs they call the I-Core program to teach academics like us to think more like entrepreneurs, to make sure that there is a product market fit before we throw everything into a research project, into an academic exercise. You know, I went through the I-Core program, so now I'm brainwashed. I understand that, you know, we can do what we do well in the lab. We can publish papers in peer-reviewed journals, but no one reads them. Only 10 of your friends actually read them, and even your dean won't read the papers. They'll just count the numbers. You know, that doesn't help society. That doesn't help human factors as a field. We need to be out there doing real work, not to say that what we do in education isn't real work.
No, I'm not saying that we're not doing real work, but it's clear that in the Institute now for Industrial and Systems Engineering, one of the disconnects for that society for a long time, that was evident in the professional conferences, is that you had an applied solutions track for industry. And academics would look at that and say, I don't know why you're standing up there. That sounds like something we would give to our undergraduate juniors to work on. But the research track, the people would come in and from, you know, very well-known companies, listen to this PhD student or this faculty member's presentation. It's like, well, you've made 4 assumptions that never exist in the real world. So now I can't listen to anything else you said because I'm never going to have that world. You know, it's like, yeah, okay. So there's been a disconnect on both sides, But if we're talking about the societal implications, there's many more companies than there are academics. And we shouldn't assume that the academic lifestyle, even though it is my favorite thing, and I believe that even with your startup, you still like being a faculty member, Mark, and you've been a faculty member. That's not what everybody wants to do. Not everybody wants to be a PhD granting institution research intensive faculty member. It does not mean that the other contributions are lesser beings or second class citizens.
True. So in addition to training more students to practice human factors, the flip side of it is that we need to be educating the public about the value of human factors. And the public includes companies, even though a lot of companies already know the value of human factors.
Well, one of the things, and really, Caroline, this is what I meant with my initial activating comment. I am unaware of any human factors and ergonomics society chapter that operates at a community college.
Wow.
And yet, when we talk about applying human factors in ways that affect industry, the associate's degree granting level is where there are a lot of unmet STEM needs. A lot of advances in cybersecurity, in cyber physical systems implementation, in call center operations, in medical technologists often have an associate's level degree or a certificate, not a bachelor's, not an RN. So there's a huge tier under the water level of jobs that would benefit by an understanding of human factors and ergonomics. I don't know of any programs, there may be out there, but I'm not aware that we are operating our educational efforts in human factors at that community college level.
Excellent observation. This is something that we need to feed back to human factors and ergonomics society. And speaking of HFES, HFES is also advocating for human factors at the highest level. You know, they're visiting Senate and congressional representatives to talk about the value of human factors, to advocate for human factors, and funding, research funding for science in general and human factors in particular. So that's happening.
I think it's really important to try to reconcile these different needs so that we can incorporate human factors into different domains, like not just industry or academics, but just as you said, Barrett, like these jobs or the people who have these jobs that require, for example, an associate's degree, the technicians or a technologist, we're designing systems for them. So we might want to also include them and give them that knowledge of our domain, so they would feel that they're better included when they're actually doing their job, right? Like that's what our goal is as human factors engineers, and I feel like we should be uniquely suited for that kind of work, right?
When's the last time anybody at U of T, maybe you're going to surprise me and I would love it if you did, but when's the last time you had a project looking at the supply chains, the operational uses, or the sources of error and error reduction at a Tim Hortons?
But I mean, we have done projects on the TTC, right? So on public transit. So I take your point, Barrett, that there aren't enough of these projects. But in our courses, we do have a lot of project work that does look at these local industries and local problems. I remember I once did a project on hot dog stands, designing the ultimate hot dog stand in Toronto. And there were students who actually went around and talked to the hot dog stand vendors. So, I mean, it can be done, and it is, but I think it's based on individuals. There's not a lot, no one tells me to do it, right? Or any of the other professors.
I don't want us to only think of design phase human factors as things that we expect for people to go to the top 7 universities or to go work for Research in Motion.
I agree. So maybe this is a message to professors all over. We should be thinking of projects that are not your standard, Airbus manufacturing or Boeing manufacturing plants, but hot dog vending. But Mark has already done that.
So we've talked a lot about raising awareness about human factors as a discipline in industry and academia and among the general public. But for people who are already aware of it, how do we advocate for the integration of human factors earlier on in the design process and generally in more stages of the design process?
Part of that is a process of understanding the audience and understanding who you're talking to. You have to know who you're talking to. And you've got to be able to talk to them at levels and about things that they can relate to. So it doesn't make sense for me to use a bunch of references talking to you all that don't resonate anywhere in Canada or don't resonate to the human factors community that's going to be listening to this. But we as human factors people have got to understand when we're advocating for the field, how the field can help those people in industry, employer, worker, stockholder, in ways that they understand on the variables that they care about. You mean to tell me that we are not going to lose our shirts on a ridiculous version 1 release that's going to burn all of our VC? If we don't even know what that means, we can't talk about our value in ways that are of relevance to our potential customers. We say, know thy user. Human factors as a discipline needs to demonstrate with our students and to our students the effort associated with understanding one's users.
That's great. And I would like to go even one step further. And this is my cynical side showing. I think if we want people to include human factors in everything from design to development to use to maintenance, service, et cetera, we need to show them the value of including human factors. And the only way, or the ultimate way to showing them the value is to show its value proposition. That is the dollar number, the dollar value that is associated with it. And everything can be boiled down to a number associated with a dollar sign, okay? By doing that, you can then effectively advocate for including human factors in everything. I learned this lesson, this very important lesson, after pitching my medical device idea to hundreds of potential investors. Now, the number may not be correct, and we all know that it's only, a guess because we don't have a crystal ball. But it's the only way to concretely evaluate human factors. You boil everything down to its value proposition that is associated with the dollar sign. And everyone understands that. Regardless of who you think your audience is, everyone understands that.
I don't know what to say about that. It kind of sounds unfortunate to me, right? Like you have to demonstrate the value of something by just associating it with money.
Yes, yes, that's the value. Money is value, right?
And I would say even to the people who want to look at social change and social advocacy that isn't just associated with dollars.
But it is.
They're starting from a dollar reference. Yes.
No, it boils down to dollar. You want social change, you want to calculate how many lives you will save, you want to calculate what the life expectancy is, if people were happier, if people were working in a safer environment, everything boils down to the dollar.
But then you can even say without the dollars, here's how many people are going to be better off.
Sure. But most people,
and here's how they're going to be better off.
You can tug at their heartstrings, but it's not concrete. Sure, many more people are going to be happier. Okay, tell me how much money I'm going to save, how much more money I'm going to make. Then I will invest in this effort.
Or
this is cynical, like I said. This is very cynical.
That's cynical.
But it is the common denominator in all decision making.
And if I were to say, well, I want to change the common denominator, well, I still have to understand what the current common denominator is.
Yes, currency.
So
you're agreeing with me then.
I'm not disagreeing with you.
I mean, it is a matter of like knowing your audience, like Barrett said, maybe to some people or to executives or to management or to industry, maybe it is like a matter of
tenure committees.
Oh, true.
Okay.
Yeah.
There are two metrics. One is publications. The other is funding.
Now that we have universities, T&P boards valuing patents, copyrights, things that cannot be published, then it comes down to the dollar.
Well, then maybe on a less cynical, more positive note, what's your outlook for this field and how do you think its visibility is going to change? How do you see the field progressing and what do you think we can do?
Well, despite Caroline's cynicism, I do believe that people, if given that information about how human factors can influence in economic terms, people will want to hear that and are ready to hear it and would believe it if we said it. We see many more designs, many more implementations where people are saying, you need to show us what is going to be the value proposition from this human performance standpoint, from this human effectiveness standpoint. We've got hundreds of millions of people who have had disruptions in their work experience based on the use of information technology. This started out as human factors work. We've talked about the use of computerization in the workplace, changes in work design. We've talked about interface design. We've watched companies rise and fall based on how well they could do video conferencing implementations. Zoom has been around for decades. Now it's a verb.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. So
thank you, COVID.
We can make tremendous innovations, implementations. We just won't always know exactly what the opportunities will be until they're upon us.
Yeah, I'm actually very optimistic. And I see that over the past 10 years, human factors has grown in visibility, not to where we would like it to be, clearly, but it has grown. And people are talking about it, even people who are not educated in human factors. So it's entering into our everyday language. So I see that as a good sign. And I see that there are ways that we can improve or can enhance its visibility. And I think it takes efforts from different perspectives and different directions with different approaches. You know, we need to educate people. We need to talk more about it. And the more we talk about it, the more it enters into people's awareness. But I think the future is bright. I think we have more to look forward to. And I think we need to do our parts to increase its visibility by doing good work, by talking more about it when good things happen, when bad things happen, to highlight the value of human factors and the importance of human factors in everything that we do, like everything from products to systems to interaction, human-human interaction, human-computer, human-robot interaction, you know, in every aspect of our lives.
So the most dangerous and best element of this opportunity is if there's more visibility, more opportunities, then it's more important for us to do good work. So when we do good work, people will notice. If we do bad work, people will notice.
Well, on that note, I think this would be a good time to end this episode. Thank you both so much for your time and for this very interesting and insightful discussion. And to our listeners, we hope you enjoyed this talk and stay tuned for upcoming episodes of HFIG Talks.